The phone call lasted 9 seconds. Roman Voss did not waste words. He never had. The men who worked for him had learned over the years that the length of his sentences was directly related to the importance of what he was saying. Short meant serious. One sentence meant final. No sentence at all. Just a look meant that someone had made a mistake they would not make again. 9 seconds was more than enough. He had been standing at the window of his office on the 14th floor when Gregor called. Below him, the city moved the way cities always do at night. Without permission, without apology, loud and indifferent to everything happening above it. Roman watched a cab cut through 3 lanes of traffic, watched a woman cross the street without looking, watched the lights of the building across from his blink in and out, like something trying to communicate. "Bring her to me," he said. Then he ended the call. He set the phone down on his desk and walked back to his chair. The chair was nothing special, dark leather, a little worn at the arms. But it was the chair he had sat in for 11 years, and it was the chair from which he had built something that most people in this city only whispered about. Not out of admiration, out of something closer to weather, the kind of thing you don't fight, you just try to stay out of. Roman Voss was 40 years old. He looked younger in certain lights and much older in others. His hair had started going gray at the temples the same year his sister died, and he had stopped caring about it the same day. He wore good clothes because bad clothes were a distraction. He ate at the same restaurant every Tuesday because he liked the soup. He had not raised his voice at another human being in 11 years, not because he was calm, but because he had learned that quiet lands harder than noise. He had 3 rules. The first was that his name was never spoken in public. The second was that the men who worked for him never brought trouble to civilians who had nothing to do with his business. The third was that debts were always collected. Not sometimes, not usually. Always. Daniel Marsh had broken the third rule. Not in some clever, ambitious way. Daniel wasn't built for cleverness. He had simply borrowed money he could not return, used it for things that did not work, and then disappeared from 3 scheduled meetings in a row, which was the sort of behavior that made Roman's men laugh before it made them quiet. But Daniel Marsh was not the point. The point was the woman in the photograph. Gregor had placed it on the desk earlier that afternoon. A single photograph, printed on plain paper, slightly blurred at the edges the way surveillance images always were. A woman leaving a building. Head down, coat pulled tight against the cold. Dark hair. She was moving fast, the way people move when they have somewhere to be and very little time to be there. Roman had looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. His wife, Gregor had said. Roman had not responded. He had just looked at the photograph. Elena Marsh, 26 years old, originally from Kyiv, had come to this country 7 years ago on a work visa that had taken her 2 years and most of her savings to arrange, held a degree in structural engineering from a university that no one in this city had heard of, but which, if anyone had looked it up, was actually very good, was currently working the morning shift at a packaging facility on the east side because the engineering license transfer had stalled somewhere in a government office and no one had called her back in 8 months. None of that was in the photograph. Roman had filled it in himself because filling things in was what he did. He ran a business that depended entirely on understanding people before they understood what was happening. It was not a skill he was proud of. It was a skill he had needed to survive, and then it had become habit, and now it was just the way he saw the world. He looked at the woman in the photograph and he thought about the degree, about 8 months of unanswered calls, about a morning shift at a packaging facility. He put the photograph in his desk drawer. "Daniel Marsh knows where to find her?" he asked. "She's at home every evening by 6, Gregor said. "Go after 6, Roman said. "Be polite." That was this afternoon. Now it was past 10, and the city was doing what it did, and Roman was sitting in his chair with a glass of water, not anything stronger, just water, waiting for the call that would tell him Gregor was on his way back. The office was quiet. It usually was at this hour. Most of his men had cleared out around 9, which was how he preferred it. There was a small couch near the window where his assistant, Patrick, had left a folder of papers that needed reviewing before morning. There was a lamp in the corner that cast the room in something warm and low. There was a photograph on the desk. Not the surveillance one, which was in the drawer, but a personal one, in a plain frame, of a shoreline, somewhere cold. Roman had taken it himself, years ago, with a cheap camera he no longer owned. He looked at the shoreline photograph the way some people look at things they cannot explain why they kept. He picked up the folder Patrick had left and opened it. The first page was a property summary. The second was a contract. The third was a list of names with numbers next to them. Amounts owed, amounts paid, amounts still outstanding. Roman read through it with the same attention he gave everything, which was complete, and the same emotion he gave most things in these hours, which was very little. His phone buzzed at 10:47. Gregor. He picked it up. "We are 20 minutes out," Gregor said. "Any problems?" There was a pause. Not long. 3 seconds, maybe. But Gregor was not a man who paused. Gregor was efficient, direct, and had been working for Roman for 9 years, long enough that Roman had learned to read the spaces between his words the same way you read the words themselves. "No problems," Gregor said. "She came without any trouble." "Good," Roman said. Another pause. "She didn't ask where we were taking her," Gregor said. "She just picked up her coat and came." Roman said nothing for a moment. 20 minutes, he repeated, and ended the call. He set the phone down. A woman who doesn't ask where she is being taken. Roman turned that over in his mind. There were two kinds of people who did that. The kind who had already accepted the worst, and the kind who were calculating so fast that they needed silence to do it. He suspected Elena Marsh was the second kind. He closed the folder on his desk. He stood up and walked to the small side room that connected to his office, where there was a sink and a shelf, and a second chair that no one ever sat in. He ran water cold and washed his hands, which was something he did when he was thinking. He had no explanation for this habit. It had started after his sister, same as the gray hair, and he had stopped questioning it. He was still standing at the sink when he heard the elevator down the hall. He dried his hands. He walked back through the office. He stood near the desk, not behind it. That felt wrong tonight. Felt too formal for something he couldn't yet name, and he waited. The door opened. Gregor came in first, 2 of his men behind him, and then Elena Marsh walked through the door, and the light in the office hit her face, and Roman Voss, who had not felt his chest do anything unexpected in a very long time, felt it do something unexpected. She was not what the photograph had shown him. The photograph had shown a woman in motion. This was a woman who had stopped, who was standing very still in the doorway of a room she had never been in, wearing a coat that was a little too thin for the season, with her hands at her sides, and her chin at a level that said she was not going to look at the floor no matter what happened next. She was looking directly at him. Roman looked back, and then he saw it. The left side of her face, the discoloration that ran from below her eye down across her cheekbone and stopped just short of her jaw, dark at the center, yellowing at the edge. Not fresh, 5 days old, maybe 6. Settled into the skin the way these things settle when they have been there long enough to start healing, but not long enough to disappear. Someone had done that. Someone who had measured the angle and the force and done it deliberately. Roman stood very still. He had been in this business for a long time. He had seen things that had cost him sleep, and things that had cost him nothing, and things that had somewhere in between. He was not a sentimental man. He was not, in most definitions of the word, a good one. He knew what he was. He had made choices that a different version of himself might not have made, and he had lived inside those choices long enough that they had stopped feeling like choices and started feeling like weather. But he was standing in his office at 10:50 at night, looking at a bruise on the face of a woman who had come without asking where she was going, and something in him, old and quiet and mostly dormant, went very, very still. He looked at Gregor. Gregor was already looking at the floor. "Bring us some water," Roman said, and his voice was exactly what it always was, low, even, without volume, because he did not raise his voice. Not in 11 years. But his hands, at his sides, had closed. Not into anything violent, just closed. The way a door closes when the wind outside picks up. He looked back at Elena. She had not moved. She was still looking at him, and he understood, in the particular way he understood things that most people couldn't read, that she was waiting, not for safety, not for an explanation, not for kindness, but to understand what kind of room she had walked into. She was calculating. He pulled the chair from the side of the desk. Not his own chair, the other one, the visitor's chair, which he almost never touched, and he set it closer to where she stood. "Please sit down," he said. She looked at the chair. Then she looked at him. "Where is my husband?" she said. Her voice was steady, accented, but precise. Each word placed the way you place a foot on unfamiliar ground, carefully, but without hesitation. Roman held her gaze. "Your husband," he said, "has some things to answer for." "I know," Elena said. Roman looked at her. "Sit down," he said again, quieter this time, not a command, something else. She sat. And Roman Voss, who had given the order 9 hours ago without a second thought, who had built his world around the principle that every debt had a cost, and every cost had a collection, stood in his own office, and felt the ground of something shift beneath him in a way he had no name for yet. He didn't look for one. He just went to his desk, sat down, and began to figure out who had put that bruise on her face. That was the first problem. Everything else would have to wait. The drive to Roman's building had taken 22 minutes. Elena had counted them. She had also counted the turns, 4 rights, 2 lefts, 1 stretch of highway, and the number of men in the car, which was 3 not counting herself, and the make of the vehicle, which she did not know because she had never been good with cars, but it was black and large and very clean, which told her something about the man they were taking her to even before she met him. She had known this day was coming. Not this exact version of it, not the 2 men at her door at 6:15 who had knocked instead of broken it down, which she noted, and who had said please, which she also noted, and who had looked at her face and then immediately looked away, which told her more than any of them realized. She had not known the shape of it, but she had known, in the slow way that you know things you are not ready to say out loud, that Daniel's mess would find its way to her door eventually. Daniel always found a way to make his messes someone else's problem. She had not cried when she packed him out of their apartment 4 months ago. She had not cried when the lawyer told her what the divorce would cost. She had not cried when she found out, 2 weeks later, that he had used her name on something she hadn't signed, which was a problem she was still untangling with a man in a small office downtown who charged by the hour and spoke very slowly. She did not cry now. She sat in the visitor's chair in a 14th floor office and looked at the man behind the desk and thought, with the part of her brain that refused to stop working regardless of circumstances, that the building she was in had a load-bearing problem in the south stairwell that someone was going to have to address within the next 3 to 5 years. The man's name, she had gathered, was Roman, no last name given, which was interesting. He was not what she had imagined on the way over, though she had tried not to imagine anything, because imagining things before you had information was a good way to be wrong, and being wrong cost you time. He was quieter than she expected. That was the main thing. She had expected someone who filled the room with noise. That was how men like this usually operated, in her experience, which was limited, but not non-existent. Her father had known men like this back in Kiev. Not in the same way, a different kind of weight, but the same basic type. Men who had accumulated enough power that they stopped needing to prove it out loud. Roman didn't prove anything. He just sat across from her and looked at her with dark eyes that were doing what she recognized as actual thinking, not performance. She respected that, even now. What she did not respect was whatever his man, Gregor, she thought she'd heard, had muttered on the phone during the drive. She hadn't caught all of it. Her English was very good. Her ability to hear through a car door at highway speed was less reliable. But she had caught the tone, and the tone had told her that whatever Daniel had done, it was not small. Nothing Daniel did was ever small. That was the tragedy of him. She had met him at a community dinner 5 years ago. He had been funny and warm, and the kind of handsome that makes you think the universe is giving you something. He had listened, and in those early months, she had believed it, because she was tired from the visa process and the job search, and the constant background noise of starting a life in a country that does not make that easy, and someone listening felt enormous. She had not been naive, she had been exhausted. Those were different things, though they could look the same from the outside. The water arrived, a glass for her, a glass for Roman, delivered by a man who set them down and left without a word. Elena picked hers up and drank because she was thirsty, and there was no reason not to. Roman watched her do this with an expression that might have been something close to respect, or at least the absence of judgment. I want to understand something, Roman said. All right, she said. Your husband borrowed money, a specific amount, a specific agreement was made. How much? She said. He told her. She set the glass down. It was more than she had expected. Not in a way that surprised her about Daniel, in a way that confirmed the arithmetic she had been doing since the lawyer's office, which was that there was no version of this situation with a tidy exit. I didn't know about it, she said. I know, Roman said. She looked at him. You knew before I said it? She asked. Your name appears nowhere in the agreement, he said. The man who arranges these things is thorough. If you had been part of it, your name would be there. She absorbed that, a man who checked before he concluded. Also interesting. Then why am I here? She asked. Because your husband cannot be located, Roman said. And because when people cannot be located, we speak with the people closest to them. We are separated, she said. Have been for 4 months. I know that too. She looked at him steadily. You know a lot. It's a habit, he said. Something passed between them then. Not warmth, not yet, not anything that had a comfortable name. More like two people recognizing the same quality in each other across a distance they had not agreed to cross yet. She filed it away and moved on. I don't know where he is, she said. I stopped tracking his movements when I stopped sharing a home with him. If I had to guess, I would say he is somewhere he thinks is safe, which means he has almost certainly misjudged the situation. Roman looked at her for a moment. Yes, he said. He has. Then we have a problem, she said, because I cannot give you what I don't have. No, Roman said. That's not why you're here anymore. The change in the sentence was small. 2 words. Not anymore. She caught them both. Then why am I here now? She asked. Roman leaned back slightly in his chair. He looked at her face, not in a way that felt intrusive, more in a way that felt like he was deciding whether to say what he was about to say, and then he said it. Who did that to your face? The question landed in the room and sat there. Elena did not flinch. She did not look away. She had spent the last several months becoming very good at receiving questions she did not want to answer without giving anything away, and this particular question she had fielded enough times, from the woman at the packaging facility who had noticed, from the man in the small office downtown who had asked twice, that she had a response ready. But she looked at Roman Voss, and she thought about the careful knock on her door, about the pleas, about the glass of water that arrived without her asking, about the man sitting across from her who had, very specifically, not sat behind his desk like a barrier but had come around the side of it, pulled the chair closer, and stayed there, within conversation distance, not intimidation distance. She had built enough structures to know when something was load-bearing. My husband, she said, is not a good man. No, Roman said. I am beginning to understand that. We are separated, but separated is not the same as free. Not when the man involved doesn't understand the word no. She had said more than she intended to. She closed the door on it. Roman said nothing for a moment. He was looking at her with that expression again, the thinking one, not the performing one. And she had the strange sensation that he was calculating something the same way she calculated structural loads, looking for the weak points, not to exploit them, to understand what was holding. You're safe here tonight, he said. The word safe landed strangely. Not badly, strangely. That's a large claim, she said. I make claims I can keep, he said. She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them looked away. All right, she said finally. Not gratitude, not surrender, just acknowledgement of a fact she had decided to provisionally accept until the evidence said otherwise. Roman nodded once. He reached for his phone and made a call that lasted about 30 seconds, during which he told someone, Patrick, she thought, to prepare the guest room on the 3rd floor and make sure there was a working lock on the inside of the door. The inside of the door. She noticed that. She picked up her water glass and finished it. Downstairs, she would learn later, a very different conversation was happening. Daniel Marsh had been found at a cousin's place 40 minutes outside the city, and Gregor was already on his way. By midnight, Daniel would be sitting in a room considerably less comfortable than this one, across from considerably less patient men, answering for a debt that had just become much more complicated than money. But Elena did not know that yet. What she knew was this. She was in a building she had never been in, with a man she had never met, who had looked at her face and asked the right question and then actually listened to the answer. In her experience, that was rarer than the debt, the car, or any of the rest of it. She set her glass down. She waited. Whatever came next, she would calculate it when it arrived. That was what she did. Gregor was not an emotional man. He had been working for Roman for 9 years, and in those 9 years he had done things that required a certain kind of stillness inside him, a capacity to look at difficult situations without letting his feelings get ahead of his thinking. Roman valued this about him. It was, in fact, one of the primary reasons Gregor still had the job. But sitting across from Daniel Marsh in a plain room in the lower level of Roman's secondary property, a building that looked from the outside like a storage company, and from the inside like whatever Roman needed it to be, Gregor found that his usual stillness was working harder than normal. Daniel Marsh was the kind of man who made you tired just by being in the room. He was not frightening. He was not especially clever. He was 31 years old, moderately tall, with the look of someone who had been told he was charming so many times in his youth that he had stopped developing anything to back it up. He sat in his chair with his legs apart and his hands on his knees, and he had spent the first 7 minutes of this conversation alternating between nervous laughter and long pauses in which he appeared to be hoping that the atmosphere might change on its own. It had not. "I was going to call," Daniel said. "I had a plan." Gregor looked at him. "The plan needed a little more time," Daniel added. "You were given time," Gregor said. "You were given more time after that. And then you stopped answering your phone. My phone had a problem. For 3 weeks." Daniel spread his hands. It was a complicated problem. Gregor put a folder on the table between them. He opened it to the first page. The numbers were clear. Amount borrowed, date, agreed return date, current date. The gap between the last two was not small. Daniel looked at the folder. He did not look at it the way a man looks at something he is surprised by. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has been avoiding, which was different. "I can get most of it," Daniel said. "Most of it," Gregor repeated. "By the end of next month. I have something in motion." Gregor was quiet for a moment. He had heard many versions of this sentence in his professional life. He had a theory, which he had never tested empirically but which felt correct, that the phrase "I have something in motion" was directly correlated with having nothing in motion at all. "Roman wants to see you," Gregor said. Daniel's jaw moved. "Tonight?" "Tonight." Daniel was quiet. Some of the bravado went out of him, the way air goes out of something when you find the right place to press. He looked down at the folder. He looked back up. "How is he?" Daniel asked, and the question had a specific texture to it, the texture of a man trying to gauge weather before he steps outside. "He is himself," Gregor said. This did not reassure Daniel, which was appropriate. They drove back to the main building in the same black car that had collected Elena earlier, though Daniel rode in it very differently, hunched slightly in his seat, hands between his knees, staring at the seat in front of him with the particular expression of someone rehearsing conversations in their head that they know will not go the way they are planning. Gregor watched him. He thought about the guest room on the 3rd floor. He thought about Elena Marsh walking into Roman's office in that thin coat and standing there with her chin level and her eyes front, and he thought about the 3 seconds of silence that had happened when the light hit her face, and Roman had seen what was there. Gregor had known Roman for 9 years. He had seen Roman receive bad news, difficult news, complicated news. He had seen Roman sit through things that would have broken most people without changing his expression at all. He had not, in 9 years, seen Roman go quite that still. It was a different kind of still from the usual kind. The usual kind was control. What Gregor had seen in those 3 seconds was something else, something older. He did not say any of this to Daniel Marsh. Daniel would find out what he needed to find out when Roman decided to tell him. That was how things worked. The building lobby was quiet when they arrived. The man at the desk nodded at Gregor and did not look at Daniel. They took the elevator to the 2nd floor, not the 14th. Roman had a smaller room on the 2nd floor for conversations he did not want in his office. which was a distinction that people who paid attention understood as significant. Daniel was not paying attention. He was still in his head, running his rehearsed conversations. They walked down a short hallway. Gregor opened a door, indicated that Daniel should go in. Daniel went in. The room was simple. A table, 3 chairs, a single overhead light that was not harsh but was thorough. Roman was already there, sitting with his hands folded on the table, his jacket still on, his face carrying nothing that gave Daniel any information about what was coming. Gregor stood near the door. "Sit down," Roman said. Daniel sat. "I want to start by—" Daniel began. "I'll start," Roman said. Daniel closed his mouth. Roman looked at him for a moment. Not a long moment, just long enough. "You borrowed money," Roman said. "You agreed to terms. You failed to meet those terms. You failed to contact anyone about it. And then you made yourself difficult to find." "I can explain." "I didn't ask you to explain," Roman said. "I told you what happened." Daniel went quiet again. "There are ways this is normally handled," Roman said. "You know them. Everyone in this type of arrangement knows them. I assume you knew them when you signed the agreement." "Yes," Daniel said. His voice was careful now. The bravado was gone entirely. What was left was smaller and less steady. "Good," Roman said. "Then I want you to understand what is different about tonight." Daniel looked at him. Truly looked, for perhaps the first time in the conversation. Roman unfolded his hands and placed them flat on the table. "I collected your wife tonight," he said. The air in the room changed. Daniel's face moved through 3 expressions in quick succession. Surprise, then something that might have been guilt, then something that might have been calculation. Gregor watched this sequence from near the door and noted that the guilt came and went faster than either of the other 2. "She has nothing to do with this," Daniel said. "I know," Roman said. "Then why?" "Because you were unavailable," Roman said. "And because we needed to have a conversation." "Is she—" Daniel started, and then seemed to decide something, and changed the sentence. "She's not involved in my business. We're separated." "I know that too," Roman said. "Then, when did you do it?" Roman asked. The room got very quiet. Daniel's expression stopped moving. It went somewhere careful and flat. "Do what?" he said. Roman looked at him. Just looked. The way you look at a sentence that has a word missing, and you already know what the word is. Daniel said nothing for a long moment. "That was between us," he said finally. "That was a personal matter." "You made it my matter," Roman said, "when you couldn't be found and I sent my men to your home. She should have told them I wasn't there and shut the door." Gregor watched Roman's hands on the table. They did not move, they did not change, but Gregor had worked for this man for 9 years, and he understood the geometry of stillness, and what was happening in Roman's hands right now was not calm. "She should have been able to shut the door," Roman said, "without a mark on her face." Daniel opened his mouth. Roman raised one hand, one finger, barely. Daniel's mouth closed. "Here is what is going to happen," Roman said. "The debt will be repaid. The terms will be restructured. The new terms will be on paper, and you will sign them tonight. You will not contact your wife. Not by phone. Not in person. Not through anyone else. This is not a request. She's still legally my wife." "That is a problem for the legal system," Roman said. "What I am telling you is separate from whatever the legal system will eventually decide. What I am telling you is that the agreement between us now includes this. You can't just—" "I can," Roman said. The sentence was 4 letters. It was the whole of the conversation. Daniel sat in his chair and seemed to understand, in the way that people sometimes finally understand things they have been avoiding, that the landscape had changed, and he had not been consulted about it. "And if I don't agree to the new terms," he said. He said it the way people say things they already know the answer to, not looking for information, looking for the courage to hear the answer out loud. Roman looked at him. "You'll agree," he said. The papers arrived 20 minutes later. Patrick brought them in and laid them on the table and stood to the side, while Daniel read through them with the slow, careful attention of a man who had run out of options and was now at least trying to understand the ones he had left. He signed at the bottom of each page with a pen that had been placed there for exactly this purpose. It took 11 minutes. When it was done, Roman took the pages and placed them in a folder without looking at them. He would review them later. The content was already known to him. The signing was the point. Daniel sat back. "Where is she now?" he asked. "Safe," Roman said. "I'd like to speak to her." "No," Roman said. The simplicity of the word left no opening. Daniel seemed to understand this. He was driven back to his cousin's place by two of Gregor's men, with instructions that were not written down but were understood completely. He would not be difficult to find again. He would make his first restructured payment on the date specified. He would not contact Elena. These were not suggestions. Back on the 14th floor, in his office, Roman stood at the window again. The city below was quieter now. It was past midnight. The lights were fewer, more spread out, and the cab that had been cutting lanes earlier was gone, or had become indistinguishable from the other cabs that were gone. He thought about the folder in his desk, the photograph, the blurred edges. He thought about the way Elena had said, "My husband is not a good man." Not with heat, not with the trembling voice of someone releasing something they had held for a long time, with the precision of someone who had looked at a structure, identified the fault, and was now simply reporting the findings. He thought about what she had said next. Separated is not the same as free. He picked up his phone and called Patrick. "The room on the 3rd floor," he said. "Is it ready?" "Yes," Patrick said. 10 minutes ago." "Make sure the heat is on," Roman said. "The building runs cold on that side." He ended the call. He stood at the window a little longer. He was not a man who acted on feeling. He was a man who acted on information, on logic, on the understood rules of the world he had built around himself over 11 careful years. He knew what he was. He had never pretended otherwise. But he was standing at his window past midnight, and he had just restructured a debt agreement not because of the money. The money was almost secondary at this point, and that itself was strange enough. But because of 11 words. Separated is not the same as free. That was a personal matter. He stood there until the city got quiet enough that he could hear the air conditioning in the hallway. Then he went to his desk, opened the file that Patrick had left, and began to read. Upstairs, on the 3rd floor, in a room with a working lock on the inside of the door and the heat on, and a thin coat folded over the back of a chair, Elena Marsh lay in a bed that was not her own and stared at the ceiling and calculated. She did not sleep for a long time. But she noticed, in the particular way she noticed structural details, that the ceiling was level, that the room was quiet, that the lock, when she had tested it before lying down, had clicked into place with the solid sound of something built to hold. She noted it, filed it, stared at the ceiling. Outside the window, the city did what it always did, without permission, without apology, and for the first time in longer than Elena could clearly remember, the sounds of it did not feel like something she had to survive. Just sounds. Just a city. Just a night. Mornings in that building had a particular quality that Elena noticed on the 2nd day. They were quiet in a way that felt chosen, not empty. There were people moving through the hallways, voices occasionally passing below the 3rd floor window, the low sound of a phone ringing somewhere down the corridor and being answered promptly. But the noise was organized, purposeful. It did not leak into spaces where it wasn't needed, which meant that when Elena opened the door to her room at 6:47 on the 2nd morning and walked down to the kitchen was as quiet as the room she had left. She found the coffee on her own. She was good at finding things in unfamiliar spaces. It was, she supposed, a personality trait that had either developed because of her circumstances or had always been there and her circumstances had simply confirmed it. Either way, she found the coffee, found the cups, found the small electric stove, and had water boiling before anyone else appeared. She was standing at the counter with her 2nd cup when Roman walked in. He stopped when he saw her. She looked at him over the rim. He looked back at her with the particular expression she was already beginning to recognize. Not surprise, exactly. More like someone encountering a piece of information and very quickly updating their model of things. "You're awake early," he said. "I work a morning shift," she said. Then, after a second, "I used to. I didn't know if I should call in. I had Patrick contact them. he said. Yesterday evening. You have a few days. She looked at him. You contacted my employer, she said. Patrick did, he said. He said there was a family matter. It's covered. She did not know what to do with this. She chose, in the absence of a clear response, to pour him a cup of coffee. She set it on the counter near him. He looked at the cup, then at her. Thank you, he said. You had hot water and good beans, she said. It is not a difficult thing. He picked up the cup. He stood on the other side of the counter from her and drank it, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything, and this was fine. She had noticed that Roman was one of those rare people who did not appear to feel the social obligation to fill silence. She was the same. It made the kitchen feel larger than it was. There is a bathroom on your floor with better light, he said eventually. First door past the landing. Patrick should have mentioned it last night. She touched the side of her face, very briefly, without meaning to. The one in my room is fine, she said. He nodded once. He did not push. She noted this. How long will I be here? She asked. A few days, he said, until some things are arranged. What things? He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he was deciding how much to say, not the kind that meant he was hiding something. Your husband signed an agreement last night, he said. There are some steps after that which take time. What kind of agreement? The financial part, Roman said. And other things. Other things. She held that. He agreed not to contact me, she said. Not a question. Roman looked at her. Yes. And you think that will hold? The agreement will hold, he said. She heard the distinction. Not Daniel's word. The agreement. She turned this over and accepted it provisionally, the same way she had accepted the room on the second night, with her eyes open. I'll need my things from the apartment, she said. Not everything. Some things. Make a list, he said. Patrick can arrange it. She looked at him. You have a very organized assistant. Something in Roman's face shifted. Not quite a smile, but the direction of one. I pay him to be organized so I don't have to think about things I find unimportant. What do you find unimportant? He thought about it. Most things. She drank her coffee. The days that followed had a shape to them that Elena had not expected. She had imagined, in the brief, practical way she imagined things, that she would be kept somewhere, that there would be restrictions, that the word safe would turn out to mean something with more edges than it first appeared. She had been in situations that presented themselves as one thing and became another, and she had learned to read the gap between the presentation and the reality. The gap here was different from what she anticipated. There were no restrictions. She could go to the kitchen. She could use the reading room on the second floor that had 3 walls of books, which she found on the third day, and which she thought was one of the more useful things she had discovered in recent memory. She could walk in the small courtyard at the back of the building if she wanted to. Patrick appeared at regular intervals, offered things, and did not hover. The men she saw in the hallways nodded at her and moved on. No one asked her questions. No one watched her in the way that felt like watching. It was, she thought, the strangest form of freedom she had ever experienced, one that existed inside a constraint she could still feel, but couldn't locate precisely. She borrowed a notebook from the reading room and, on the 4th morning, began writing. Not a diary. Numbers. She had been thinking, in the slow background way she thought about things when the front of her mind was occupied elsewhere, about the problem she had parked 8 months ago, the engineering license. She had hit a wall. She had hit 3 walls, actually, each of which turned out to have a door somewhere that she had not found yet. She wrote out the sequence of the problem, the steps she had already taken, the steps she had not taken and why. She was sitting in the reading room at 10 in the morning, 3 pages into this, when Roman appeared in the doorway. He looked at the notebook. Paperwork? He said. A problem I'm working on, she said. He came into the room. He looked at the shelves in the way a person looks at something they own but don't think about very often. He pulled out a book from the second shelf. She noticed it was a history of something. She couldn't see the title. And then he looked at the notebook again. What kind of problem? He said. She showed him the page, not expecting anything, just showing. He looked at it for a moment. He pointed at the second line. This step. Have you contacted the board directly or only through the application process? She looked at him. Only the application. The application takes 8 to 14 months and is dependent on a review committee that meets quarterly, he said. The board itself can be contacted directly by a licensed employer on your behalf. The timeline is shorter. She stared at him. How do you know that? She said. I had to look it up once, he said. A few years ago, someone I was working with had a similar issue. He paused. Different field, same process. She looked down at her notebook. I didn't know that, she said. It was a simple sentence and she meant it simply, but it landed on something underneath her that had been tight for 8 months, and she felt it, just briefly, shift. I can have Patrick find the contact information, Roman said. That would be useful, she said. Her voice was steady. Her pen, she noticed, had pressed a small dent into the page. He nodded. He went back to the shelf and returned the history book to its place. He started to leave. Roman, she said. He stopped. She looked at the notebook, then at him. Thank you, she said, and she meant the room, and the lock, and the coffee, and the 8 months of an answer she hadn't found, and all the things she was not going to list out loud. He looked at her for a moment. It's a straightforward process, he said, once you know the step. He went back upstairs. She sat with the notebook. She wrote down the new information, circled it, drew a line from it to the 3rd stage of the problem, then the 4th, and watched the sequence rearrange itself into something that finally had an exit. The pen made a small sound against the paper. She kept writing. On the 6th day, she found him in the kitchen at 5:30 in the morning. She had come down earlier than usual because she had not slept well, not because of the room or the building, but because she had spent most of the night thinking about a specific calculation she hadn't been able to resolve before her eyes got too heavy to stay open, and then her eyes had gone light again at 4:45, and she had given up on sleep and decided to use the time. Roman was at the counter with his back to her, coffee already made. He was reading something on a slim phone, scrolling slowly. He heard her. He did not turn immediately. He just said, "There is coffee." "I can see that," she said. She poured a cup. She stood at her usual side of the counter. He put the phone face down, not in a hiding way, more in an "I'm done with that now" way, and picked up his own cup. They stood in the kitchen in the 5:30 dark, which was different from the 6:40 dark, thicker and quieter. And Elena looked at the window above the sink and thought about the calculation she had been working on. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Not about Daniel or any of that," she said. "Something else." "All right." She looked at him. "Why does it matter to you, the bruise, what he did? You could have had the conversation about the debt and sent me home. The agreement would have covered it." Roman was quiet. She watched him think. She had gotten, in 6 days, quite good at distinguishing between Roman thinking and Roman being silent for other reasons. This was thinking. "You came without asking where you were going," he said. "That doesn't answer the question." "It answers part of it," he said. She waited. "My sister," he said. He said it the way you say the name of a place you used to live. Not heavy, not careful, just located. 2 words and then nothing after them. She did not ask him to go on. He didn't. They stood in the kitchen. The coffee was very good. Outside, something, a delivery truck maybe, rumbled past on the street below and then was gone. "I had a building in Kiev," she said. Not immediately. After a pause that felt like the right length, he looked at her. An office building, 14 stories. I was the one who found the fault in the south load column. Not a dramatic fault, nothing visible, just numbers that didn't align the way they should. I wrote it up. My supervisor put his name on the report. She drank her coffee. They did the repair. The building is still standing. 14 stories. Roman was looking at her with the kind of attention that felt like being read. "You're still here," she said. "Yes," he said. "The building is still standing," she said again. That's the part that mattered. He looked at her for a long time. "Yes," he said, and his voice had something in it she hadn't heard there before. Something that made her look down at her cup, and then back up, and decide not to name it. She finished her coffee. She rinsed the cup and put it on the rack to dry, and then she said good morning, and went upstairs and sat at the desk in her room with the notebook, and worked through the calculation until it resolved, which it did, just before 7, in the clean way that things resolve when you have given them enough time and the right conditions. She wrote the answer at the bottom of the page. She sat back. Outside the window, the city was starting to wake up. Light coming through at a low angle, the kind that makes ordinary buildings look briefly better than they are. She thought about 2 words, said in a kitchen at 5:30 in the dark, without explanation, without asking for anything in return. My sister. She thought about what it cost to say a thing like that to someone you have known for 6 days, and what kind of person says it, and whether the building is still standing. She thought these things and did not name them, and picked up the notebook and turned to a clean page. She had work to do. Patrick delivered the contact information for the engineering board on a Tuesday. He also delivered, without being asked, a document that laid out the timeline, the required materials, and the name of the specific person at the board who handled licensing transfers for international credentials. Elena read it at the kitchen table. She read it twice. Then she sat back and looked at the ceiling in the way she sometimes looked at ceilings, which was not vacancy but a particular kind of focus that happened when she needed to be in her head for a moment, without any outside interference. When she came back down from the ceiling, Patrick was still standing near the doorway with the particular stance of someone who was not hovering but was available. "Is there a printer somewhere?" she said. "Second floor," Patrick said. "Reading room, leftmost shelf. There's a machine behind the dictionary collection that most people miss." "Of course there is," she said. She printed the documents. She wrote the letter, 3 drafts, the third of which was exactly what she wanted, precise and professional, and carrying nothing extra, the way a well-designed structure carries nothing that doesn't contribute to what is holding it up. She addressed it to the specific name. She used the address Patrick had provided. She handed it to Patrick to mail. "This goes today," she said. "It goes today," he said. She went back to the reading room. She had, in the 8 days she had been in the building, gotten through most of 1 shelf of books. This was not bragging. She read quickly, and the books were varied enough that she had been able to cycle between them the way you cycle between exercises, using different parts of the same capacity, keeping it from getting tired. There was a structural engineering text she had found on the 3rd shelf that she had set aside and kept coming back to. Not because she didn't know the material, she knew most of it, but because one of the chapters on tension load distribution had a diagram that the author had drawn poorly, and she had been, in the margins of a notepad she had started keeping next to the chair, quietly correcting it. This was what she was doing when Roman came in that afternoon. He looked at the notepad. He looked at her. She showed him the diagram. "The original has the load distribution pointing here," she said, indicating the book. "But if you apply the formula they're using 3 chapters earlier, the distribution should actually run along this line." She drew it. "The diagram is wrong, not dangerously. It's a textbook, not a blueprint, but wrong." Roman looked at the diagram, at the correction, at her. "Has it always been wrong?" he asked. "Probably," she said. "Or the author changed the formula partway through and didn't go back to check the diagrams. That happens." "Does it bother you?" he said. She thought about it. "A little," she said. "Not because of the book, because of whoever studied from it and didn't catch it." He picked up the notepad and looked at the correction more carefully. "If you wanted to send a letter to the publisher," he said, "Patrick can find the address." She looked at him. He was not smiling, but the suggestion had something in it that was the structural equivalent of one. "I might do that," she said. "Good," he said. He set the notepad down. He crossed to the shelves and looked at them in that familiar way, searching for something specific or just orienting. She still wasn't sure which. He pulled out a book she recognized as a collection of architectural history, flipped through it briefly, and put it back. "There's a problem," he said, and the tone shifted enough that she put the notepad down. "What kind?" she said. He sat in the chair across from her. He sat in the way he did most things, without ceremony, no particular adjustment, just occupying the space. "The men your husband was connected to," he said. "The people the debt came from originally. Not me. Above me in the arrangement." She waited. "They have a different kind of interest in this situation than I do," he said. "The agreement I made with Daniel about you, they're not party to it. And they are not pleased about the money. They want to collect from me," she said, "not a question. They want to use whatever is available to them," he said. "You are available to them because you were connected to Daniel and because they are not careful about the distinction between connected and responsible. She looked at her hands. She looked back up. "How serious?" she said. "Serious," he said. "I won't say otherwise." She sat with it. "What are the options?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "I can handle it," he said. "I have the standing to handle it. There are ways this works that are not your concern." "You said can," she said. "Not will." "A slight thing," he noted it. "I will handle it," he said. "But I needed you to know, because it means you should stay here longer than we planned, and I don't want you to stay somewhere you haven't chosen." The sentence landed in the room and sat there, and Elena felt the weight of it. Not the danger part, though she felt that too, but the second part. The "I don't want you to stay somewhere you haven't chosen." She looked at him. He looked back. "I'll stay," she said. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "I've decided," she said. He nodded once. He was quiet for a moment. "Then I need to make some calls," he said. He stood. "Roman," she said. He stopped. She looked at the notepad, at the corrected diagram, at the 8 days of mornings and coffee and silence that somehow added up to something she did not have an engineering term for, but which she recognized, the way she recognized structural integrity, by feel, by what held. "Be careful," she said. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "I will," he said. He left. She picked up the notepad. She looked at the diagram. She drew one more correction, a small one she had been thinking about for 2 days, and then she put the pen down. She looked at the empty doorway. Outside, the city moved. Without permission, without apology, the way it always did. She picked the pen back up. She had a letter to write to a publisher. And after that, she would think about the specific nature of a man who told you about danger not to frighten you, but because he did not want you to be somewhere you hadn't chosen. She would think about that for a long time. She was already thinking about it now. 3 weeks. That was how long it took Roman to resolve what needed resolving. Elena learned this not all at once, but in pieces, the way you learn most things that matter. A word here, a phrase there. The specific quality of a phone call heard from 2 floors up that lasts exactly the right amount of time. The particular set of Roman's shoulders when he came into the kitchen on a Wednesday morning, and poured his coffee, and stood at the counter, and was quieter than usual, in a way that was different from his regular quiet. She had learned to read the differences. "It's done," he said, on the Thursday. She was in the reading room. He stood in the doorway. "The problem you mentioned," she said. "Yes." "All of it?" "All of it," he said. "You can go wherever you want to go now." She looked at the book in her lap. She had not been reading it. She had been thinking, which was a different activity that sometimes required a book as a prop. She set it on the arm of the chair. "What did it cost you?" she said. "That's not your concern," he said. "I'm asking anyway," she said. He looked at her. In 3 weeks, she had gotten quite precise about what Roman silences meant. And this one meant he was deciding whether the truth was a gift or a burden and which one she needed. "Not as much as it would have cost a year ago," he said finally. "I have more standing now than I did then." It was a negotiation. It ended correctly. "Were you in danger?" she said. A pause. "Briefly," he said. She breathed through her nose. She looked at the window. "I see," she said. She looked back at him. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer it the same way you answered the other things, without taking out the difficult parts." "All right," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Why?" He didn't ask which why. He knew which why. He had known it was coming since the Thursday before last, when he had sat across from her in the reading room and told her about the danger, and watched her say, "I'll stay," with the particular calm of a woman who had already calculated the structure of the thing and found it sound. He came into the room. He sat in the chair across from her, the same chair he always sat in, the one with the slight lean to the left that neither of them had ever mentioned. He put his hands on his knees. "I sent men to collect a woman I didn't know," he said, "because of a debt that had nothing to do with her. I brought her here because it was practical. When I saw her face, when I saw what had been done to her, I understood that practical was not going to be enough." She waited. My sister's name was Claire, he said. She was 31. She trusted a man who was not worth trusting, and I was not there soon enough, and she is not here now. He said it the way he said most things, without decoration, without the performance of pain, just the fact of it, placed on the table between them. I cannot fix what happened to Claire, he said. I know that. But I could fix what was happening to you, so I did. Elena sat very still. That's not the whole answer, she said. He looked at her. The whole answer, he said, is that it stopped being about Claire somewhere around the third morning. She held his gaze. The third morning, she repeated. When you were correcting the textbook diagram, he said, and you showed me the line, and you explained it to me as if I was a person capable of understanding, not as if I was powerful, not as if I was dangerous, just as if I was a person sitting across a room who might understand a line drawn on paper. She was quiet. I had forgotten, he said, what it felt like to be spoken to like that. The reading room was very still, the book on the arm of the chair, the notepad with its diagrams, the shelf of books that had been there before either of them arrived in this city, in this building, in this room. Elena looked at him for a long time. She was not a woman who moved before she understood what she was moving toward. She was not a woman who said things she didn't mean or felt things she couldn't locate. She had spent 7 years in this country learning exactly how much a word cost, and she did not spend them carelessly. She reached across the space between the chairs and put her hand on top of his. She did not say anything. He looked down at her hand. He turned his over, slowly, and held it. They sat in the reading room in the middle of the afternoon, with the city outside doing what it did, and neither of them said anything for a while, because everything that needed to be said had been said, and what was left did not require words. Later, weeks later, months later, people who knew Roman Voss in the professional capacity would notice things. The particular care with which he now handled disputes involving people who were not directly connected to the events in question. The clause that appeared in several of his agreements, something about conduct, something about what was and was not covered under an arrangement. Patrick noticed, Gregor noticed. Gregor, in fact, had noticed first, back in the car on the first night, when he had made the call and said, "We are 20 minutes out," and Roman had said, "Good," and then said, "Tell me again what she was doing when you arrived." Packing her coat, Gregor had said. Didn't ask questions, just got her coat and came. He had heard something in Roman's silence then. He had not named it. He had learned in 9 years that some things resolved better when you left them room. He had been right. Elena's letter to the engineering board received a response in 4 weeks. The response was from the name Patrick had found, a woman named Dorothy, who turned out to be efficient and direct, and genuinely interested in the question of why the transfer process took so long for international credentials, which was a subject she apparently had opinions about. The license, processed through the correct channel, arrived 11 weeks later. It was a Wednesday. Patrick brought it to the reading room, where Elena was working on a set of calculations for a small structural consulting job, her first, found through a connection Roman had quietly made and then pretended he hadn't made, which she had seen through immediately and said nothing about, which he was grateful for. She held the license. She read it. She set it on the desk. She sat for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and went back to work. That evening at dinner, they had begun eating dinner together some weeks ago in the way that things begin when no one makes an official decision and it simply becomes the shape of the day. She told him. The license came, she said. I know, he said. Patrick told me. You could pretend to be surprised, she said. I could, he said. She looked at him across the table. He looked back. I'm going to need a proper workspace, she said. I know, he said. Not in this building, she said. Something separate, my own. I know, he said again. She tilted her head slightly. Did you already look into it? Patrick found 3 options, he said. 2 on the east side, 1 near the river. Of course he did, she said. Roman picked up his fork. He ate. She watched him for a moment. I'll look at the one near the river first, she said. The light is better there, he said. In the mornings. She looked at him. He did not look up from his plate, but the corner of his mouth moved, and she knew that particular movement by now, the way she knew load-bearing lines and structural faults, with certainty, and with something that was not just knowledge, but the thing that comes after knowledge. When you have learned a thing so well it stops being information and starts being home. She picked up her fork. They ate dinner. Outside, the city moved, without permission, without apology, loud and indifferent and beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they have been standing long enough to mean something. The building was still standing. That was the part that mattered. Some things end with a dramatic moment, a rescue, a revelation, a scene that announces itself as the turning point. Those endings are satisfying in the short term. They give the reader somewhere to arrive. But some things end the way this one did, quietly, at a dinner table, between two people who had come to understand each other in the particular way that is harder and slower than falling, which is the weight-bearing kind of understanding, the kind that does not require the floor to announce itself before it holds you up. Roman Voss had given an order 9 seconds long and expected a clean, logical outcome. Instead, he had gotten a woman who corrected textbook diagrams, drank his coffee without thanking him for it, said, "What do you need from me?" instead of "Save me," and had rearranged, quietly and without fanfare, the geography of everything he had thought he understood about the space between powerful and safe. Elena Marsh had gotten into a car without asking where it was going, because she was a woman who had learned that the car was not the point. The destination was, and the destination was something you calculated when you arrived, not before. She had arrived at something she did not have an engineering term for, and which she had, in her careful, precise way, decided she did not need one. Some structures do not need to be named, they only need to hold. They held. That was the story. Not the debt, not the order, not the 9 seconds on the phone, or the photograph with its blurred edges, or the black car on a November night. The story was a reading room and a kitchen at 5:30, and a corrected diagram and 2 words, "My sister," said in the dark to someone who had earned them. The story was a door with the lock on the inside. And the story was a woman who, when the door was open and she could have walked through it in any direction, chose the one that led back to the table, back to the work, back to the one person in that city who had looked at her face and asked the right question. Some endings are not endings. Some of them are just the beginning of the part that lasts.